of our expected outcomes and things that might actually constitute barriers.
Right.
And it's the type of question that begs some further examination in an interview setting, because in the rather sterile nature of rating scales, it's difficult to determine what an individual's intent might be. So I just thought I would raise a couple of items here that, and you're not the only one that has raised these points. So I'm intrigued by this. A couple of the significant barriers that you identified was one of them was the central control of curriculum by the university centers, parallel worlds of socioeconomic deficit versus prosperity, and the third one was this was rather a neutral factor for you, but for others it went in one of two directions, and that's the advent of competency-based education, which of course has really begun in many cases to have support even among the national bodies and so on.
Yes, so I think I rated the CBME as neutral.
You did as neutral. This is actually a probing kind of question that I'm asking for all individuals to see.
I think that the emerging problem with CBME and I don't know if it's restricted to the distributed model or if it's general. I don't know that. So you may hear the same thing from others, but I think that there is still a resistance. So I think that people do understand the potential value of competency-based education. So it's not, it's intuitively sensible. It kind of makes sense that people will learn things at different rates. And if you learn something early, whether that's because of prior learning experiences, like for example, in our case, and I think in almost every case in the medical school classes, you have former nurse practitioners, you have former pharmacists, you have former physiotherapists, et cetera, et cetera. So people who come with a broad base of experience who may actually learn things more quickly and be able to move on. I think intuitively that makes sense to people. The forms that are required to be filled out with CBME, as with other forms of evaluation, drive people crazy.
Okay.
Because it takes a long, long time. They have to do it frequently. It's not language that they're familiar with. The principle is intuitive, but the language used on the CBME forms and so on is less intuitive. And so I think people look at that and say, Jesus, it's not making sense to me. So again, when I talk about understanding the different epistemologies, who am I as a community-based practitioner? I'm a storyteller. Right? I'm a storyteller. That's who I am as a community-based practitioner. I'll talk about, you ask me a question about something esoteric and scientific, and I'll tell you a story about a patient that I saw last week.
Okay.
You'll have to make the translation, right? So I think that is the disconnect, but it is a disconnect for me not so much about competency-based medical education as opposed to other time-based medical education. I think it's a disconnect between who I am as a practitioner and who those people are. Sort of, it's almost an ontologic difference. It's almost a difference of who I am as a practitioner and who I am as a medical education scholar, developing these complex ways of evaluating. And because it's such a departure from the traditional way of evaluating students, I think they're just struggling and saying, I'm not sure what this is all about. I think this person is really good, pass. Or, I just think the whole, I think it's a disconnect between the practitioner and the scholar there. Succinctly, I think that's what it is.
Okay.
The practitioner is a storyteller. the scholar is a scientist, and they're kind of different worlds.
I'd like to ask you a bit of an opinion question that is actually related to the nature of this study. When the Research and Metrics group of the AFMC provided me the opportunity to lead this study on DME and to look at the potential development of definitions and typologies and so on, I of course was going into this with a great deal of naivety, principally because I'm not a physician. So this rather embeds me in a set of cultures that are very, very new to me. I've tried to indicate to those to whom I work with and those who I report to at the Faculty of Medicine here that might actually put me in a bit of an advantageous position, because I can work somewhat as an embedded researcher, and I don't bring a great deal of experience and potential biases to things, but I'm beginning to be overwhelmed and rather bewildered at the tremendous array of descriptors and just what DME is as you move from province to province and institution to institution. In your view, Marion, is it important or is it not particularly necessary to look at the national landscape, conduct a study like this and try to find some degree of consensus on things like terminologies, how we might describe certain types of institutions, such as, you describe yourself as being at a regional medical campus. Can we all agree on what that is? Or someone over here describes himself as being at a satellite medical campus. Can we define what that is, and so on? Do you have any thoughts as to whether this might be something of great importance, or might there be other aspects coming out of a study like this that for you would be much, much more valuable?
So the part of the answer, I think, to that resides in understanding the so what. Is the so what so that we have common language across all medical schools? If that's what we're striving for, if that's the purpose, then yes, I think it's helpful and valuable to seek the commonality that we can, understanding that there are so many different models out there already, and about some of them, I would say, from an Osmond perspective, you're really not doing distributed medical education.
Right.
You're putting students somewhere else for a little while and bringing it back, but that's not distributed medical education. And I think that there could be, and I have been involved in some pretty vociferous arguments to say, well, no, you can't tell me that. So there is argument and there's debate, and most of it is pretty healthy. So I think it would be helpful to have some common definitions, but as soon as we have started down the road in AFMC to those definitions, we stumble on words always. We stumble on. So I wouldn't be happy with any definition that didn't have reciprocal learning in it. I could live without mutual benefit if you absolutely forced me to, but I cannot live without reciprocal learning.
Okay.
I think that's a foundational commitment. So, and other people have those same kinds of phrases or ways of thinking about distributed medical education that makes it almost makes it very, very personal. So, I don't know. I think, yes, it would be helpful to have some starting points. It would be helpful to have that. It would be helpful to have some idea what we mean by the difference between a NOSM, for example, which we consider our entire program distributed. And others would argue that, no, you have classrooms just like everybody else. Don't be silly. They just happen to be in two cities. Well, that's a big difference, we'll say. So, and on it goes. So yes, I would say the effort toward a common understanding is always going to be helpful. Will we get to that common understanding and agreement? Understanding maybe, but agreement about the words to use? I'm less convinced that we will do that. but I think the effort is worthwhile, and I think that it